Session today really talks about a technique called 5S and workplace organisation. So this is the first session of module 4, and this is really just sort of like bringing you some of the sort of like the fine-tuning tools and techniques within the Lean toolbox. So it's some of the stuff that you can think about, that you can use, that really get you to think about how to fine-tune that process, and builds upon what we've been talking about in terms of plan, do, check out cycles. So the idea that you come up with a new way of working, you implement it, which is the do, you understand what works, what doesn't work, and then you modify your plans accordingly. And 5S and workplace organisation is essentially another way of doing that. So what I'll do as part of today, I'll take you through a bit of theory, as always, take you through the same format, take you through a little bit of theory, give you some examples of 5S, which is the best way of explaining what 5S and workplace organisation is all about. The first stages of doing 5S implementation will get you to do an audit. So between now and next time we get together in 2 weeks' time, we'll get you to do a 5S audit. And then we'll spend a little bit of time at the end just talking through how you can use that to build upon the work that you've already been doing, how you can use 5S as a way of building upon and linking it into your other lean work. I used to use 5S as a way of consolidating the improvements. So once I got the improvements in place, I got the process working the way I wanted it to work, I found that 5S was a really good way of making sure it stuck and it carried on working that way, and you kept all the best practice in place. So I'll talk through how you can use it as a way of sustaining the improvements basically within your business. So that's the session for today, just a bit of a breakdown of what's involved. Reminder of the course objectives. So again, what we're trying to do is get you to actually implement these tools and techniques, not just talk about them and talk about the theory, which is great. But the most important thing with any new learning is all about implementing it and getting you to apply it to your own businesses. And also learning what works and what doesn't work within your own businesses. A bit like the conversation we was having with Alex about the different trials that he's doing on videotaping good and slower pickers. You know, it's all about working out what tools and techniques work within your business and then modifying it, your approach, so that you've got something that's suitable for your particular environment. So where we've been doing it, short bite-sized approach. So lots of small steps. It's very, as I've always mentioned to you, Lean is very pragmatic. It's essentially all about how you actually you go about small steps and small changes within your business. So the way we've tried to introduce it is step-by-step guides basically. So we'll carry on doing that as we go through today's course as well. And that's just a bit of an overview of what we've done so far. So we've took you through the Lean principles. We've shown you how to identify areas within your business to carry out improvements, how to some specific things. So David covered things like activity sampling. And then today is really all about this concept, and this module is all about the concept of how do you keep it going, using things like visual management, using the plan, do, check out cycles, using things like 5S and workplace organisation, which is what today's session is all about, how you can use this to sustain the improvements and hopefully generate more. So that's the breakdown of the individual modules, and then just a cover of what we're going to do today. This is just a summary of what David covered with you. So we talked about key metrics within the business. Undoubtedly, you know, David talked about how this links into the plan, do, check out cycle as well. So basically, we use the metrics of quality, cost, delivery, underpinned with safety and morale, as a way of checking to make sure that whatever improvements you've delivered, they've started to have an impact on the operation itself. So the idea behind metrics is to give you a very, very quick feedback to say that the ideas that you're trialing, the approaches and the improvements that you're generating, they're starting to have an impact on the operational performance. And we always talk about quality, cost and delivery as being sort of like 3 core elements to business improvements. So quality could be your measure of right first time. So how good is the quality of the pick of the crop, where the lifting of the crop itself. The delivery is all about your ability to deliver to the customer on time. And the cost is all about productivity, or largely about productivity. So how many kilograms per hour, for example, are you picking? So normally that's what we measure as the core metrics. Obviously, people's health and safety is crucial. You won't want to do anything. You want to carry out any improvements that put people at risk, put people in danger. So we always sort of like have these as like the foundation measures within the operation. So we always talk about making sure that the operation is as safe as possible. And you'll see with the 5S side of things as well. 5S, it's very closely aligned to health and safety. So it's a good way of not only improving productivity, but also improving reducing the risk of accidents within the operation. And the idea behind morale, undoubtedly David talked about this, and I think you guys have recognised this. And whenever we've come out and we've visited businesses, the constant feedback that we're getting is that it's difficult to retain people. So the ability to recruit the right skills and retain those skills within the business is absolutely crucial. So this measure of making sure that people enjoy working within the business and enjoy working within the operation, making sure that people, the morale is high, is fundamental again to supporting the improvements. And hopefully by involving people in doing improvements, by taking the time to ask people their opinions and get them involved in doing the improvement activities, hopefully that'll have an impact as well on improving morale. The reason why we lent that line 3 there about balance metrics, we often find that you need to keep the right balance, because the risk is if you focus too much on productivity, as you know, you can start to have a negative impact on quality. So you have to measure both productivity and quality at the same time. So normally we talk about this balance of, which is why we come up with this QCD, quality, cost and delivery, because it's a way of just balancing the metrics and make sure that you're not biasing your improvements to the performance of the business itself. And then the idea being, and on the visual management boards that we've talked about, so the whiteboards, that you measure the performance of the operation, you set targets, and hopefully that's again another incentive for people to drive towards those targets. And I think people naturally want to improve things. Normally people within a business, if you've recruited the right people within the business, they'll naturally want to improve it. It's fundamental to our human nature that we want things to get better, we want things to improve. Particularly, it's got a feedback on the pay levels that we can achieve, or enjoyment within the operation and the business itself. So by setting targets, by hopefully motivating people to achieve those targets, again, hopefully that starts to have an impact on people's morale, a positive impact on people's morale. Everyone all right? So today, talking about workplace organisation, the idea being of a place for everything and everything in its place. So just 2 good pictures of a place for everything and everything in its place. So the idea being is that if you need any tooling or any equipment, ideally it should be there for you to find it. What you don't want is people hunting tools and equipment down by walking around all over the operation. And the amount of time when we've been doing process mapping activities or waste walks, and we've observed people spending 15-20 minutes trying to find secateurs, or packaging, or labels, or brooms and brushes, so to try and find the equipment they actually need to do the job itself. Before it only needs to happen 3 or 4 times in a normal working day, and before you know it, you've lost 40 minutes to an hour of people's working day just in people trying to find things that they actually need for the job itself. So this idea of workplace organisation, or 5S, and I'll take you through what the 5S's mean in a minute. It's this concept of a place for everything and everything in its place. And these 2 pictures show this. One of them's from a manufacturing site on the right-hand side, So they've got all the equipment on shadow boards. So if somebody takes a piece of equipment, you can see that it's been taken, it's all labelled up, so you know that's what's missing. Sometimes I've worked in businesses where we've given everybody a little key ring with their name written on it. And if they take a piece of equipment or tooling, they put the key ring on the board with their name, and that way everyone knows who's got that particular tool. So if somebody else needs to find it, they can go back to the board and they can look up on there. They can see the key ring, they can see the individual's name on the key ring, and they know who's actually taken that particular tool to reduce down the amount of time spent looking for the equipment. And the idea being at the end of each day, at the end of each shift, the tooling's put back up on the board again, and then everything's back in its place, ready for the start of the next day or start of the next shift operation. The one on the left-hand side is from a nursery, and that's from a potting machine. And that's all the tooling and the equipment that they need to actually set up the potting machines. So before, these were scattered underneath the machine itself. They were buried in peat and hidden underneath the conveyors. So when they actually stopped the machine to change over the potting sizes that they were working on, they'd lose quite a bit of time actually just trying to find the tooling that they needed to actually set up and do the size change on the potting machine. And that 20 minutes soon starts to amplify up. If you've got 6 people that are stood around for 20 minutes whilst you hunt down the tooling and change the tooling over on a machine, very quickly that can multiply up into quite significant losses. So what they did is they put all the tooling they needed up on a board so everyone can find it. They started to paint the boards in different colour and the tooling in different colours, so you can actually see what tooling went together for the different size changes. And some of the tooling was very close to the naked eye in terms of dimensions, was actually very close in size. So by colour coordinating it, they actually made it easier for people to identify what the correct size was. So it just reduced down the chance of the risk of somebody setting the machine up incorrectly. And this was the picture of the before and after, so you can see on this what it was like before. So you can see the challenge with the picture on the left-hand side. Trying to find the tools and the equipment that you needed. It was scattered around all over the place, so you can see that quite a bit of time could be lost, and also the risk of damage to the tooling as well. There's a greater risk when it's stored like it is on the left-hand side. There's a greater risk of damage to the tooling. So they found that by putting it back this way, it reduced down that risk. And if there were a need for any repair work, they can identify that as part of putting it back and cleaning down the tooling and the equipment in between setups. They could actually spot to see if there was any damage to the tooling and therefore get it repaired in a timely fashion. We've also applied this to offices. So offices, you can end up with quite a bit of paperwork scattered around the office itself. So we've been into businesses where we've gone through there and we've applied the same principles. So the first 2 S's, sort and set. Sort is get rid of all the clutter, so get rid of all the stuff that you don't need. And the idea behind set is a place for everything and everything in its place. So what we simply did before in the 2 pictures, the first thing we did, we went through and any archive paperwork, anything that wasn't required, we scanned it first of all and we put it onto digital systems and a digital archive, and then we got rid of that paperwork. So it made it much easier for people to find the paperwork that they needed, and then also the idea of place for the set, this concept of a place for everything in its place, by getting rid of the clutter and just storing the things that you do need. It just reduced down the chance and the risk of people not being able to find the things and time lost with that, or any errors associated with it as well. So the risk of picking up the wrong bit of information and working on the wrong piece of information as well. So it doesn't necessarily just have to be operations. You can equally apply this to back office processes as well as the office systems. Another example, this one's from manufacturing. So you can see left-hand side, a typical manufacturing bench. We come across this quite a bit in manufacturing, where there's bits of equipment stored everywhere, and then the right-hand side, where you've you've got a place for everything in its place. And this reason why I put this up, because I think it's a really good example of how you can use these concepts and these principles to actually generate continuous improvement. So as part of doing this sort and this set activity, one of the guys had the suggestion of, why don't we make the bench curved? So it's scallop the bench. So you can see on the right hand side, they've actually scalloped the bench. And he also wanted a wiring loom, so they can actually make it easier to do the wiring assemblies, because they were quite tricky and they were quite difficult to wire these particular electrical cabinets that they were making. So one of the ideas that came out of this was putting together a wiring loom. So by doing the 5S activities as well, you can start to generate some improvements in themselves. So it's not always a good way of sustaining improvements, it can also be used to generate improvements. So these are just some of the things of what 5S is. I mentioned it can be a starting point for continuous improvement. Very easy to do. So it could be a really good way of getting people involved in doing improvement activities. It's part of the Lean Toolkit, which is also used for sustaining improvements. It's also a good way of making it easier for people to identify what tooling and equipment is needed for the job. So if you've got new starters coming into the operation, it just makes it easier for people to understand what tooling and equipment they need to use for the job itself. And it's a really quick way of getting people involved in doing improvements as well. So you'll see from what we'll take you through in a minute, what the 5 S's are and the 5 stages are. It's a really quick and easy way of getting people involved in doing the improvement activities as well. This is just from a warehouse. So this is your classic garden centre in this instance. And the problem they had on the before and after photographs on the left-hand side is all the storage corridors on the racking had got cluttered, and there was lots of product had been placed. And then when it came to actually finding the things that they needed and taking them out of the racks, first of all they had to clear the gangways. So they used to spend a lot of time clearing the gangways to be able to get access to the packaging that they needed or the products that they needed within this particular garden centre. And I've seen it as well in pack houses where there's lots of packaging materials and it's difficult to access the packaging materials, or it might be pots or containers or labels, and it's difficult to find where they are and to actually access. So time is lost in getting the right equipment and the right packaging materials, the right labels to the packing lines themselves, and it starts to reduce down the productivity of the area itself. Right, so let's push on. Let's do a little bit more. This is just a simple illustration of how you can actually apply 5S. And what I'm going to do first of all, I've got some numbers that I'm going to put up on a slide, and there's numbers 1 through to 90 that I'm going to put up on the screen. And I want you to start off at number 1, find 1, and then work your way up to 45. So do it in a sequential manner. So you find 1, then find 2, then 3, then 4, and then 5, and work your way up to 45. There is a number in the missing. What I want you to do is see how high a number you can get to in 60 seconds. So I'm going to give you 60 seconds, and after 60 seconds, I'll take the screen off, and then basically I want to see how far you've got in 60 seconds. And then what I'll do is I'll start applying the 5S principles. You can start to see how the 5S principles make it easier for you to find bits of information, how it can improve productivity. Right, you ready? 3, 2, 1, go. So start off at 1, find 1, then move your way on to 2, keep going sequentially, and try and get to 45. So 15 seconds gone, 45 seconds left to go. Thirty seconds gone. $45 seconds gone.
Yeah, but how we do this?
10 seconds left. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Right. How far did you get? Right. So the first S is sort. So what I'm going to do next on the screen is ask you to get to number 4, try and work your way to number 45, and there were numbers up to 90 on the screen. So what I'll do first of all, as part of the sort, I'm going to declutter the slide. I'm going to get rid of every number that's over 45. Okay? So same activity, start off at 1, work your way up to 45. But it's going to be a bit easier this time around. So I'm only going to give you 30 seconds. So we'll start it again. I'll put the slide up, start off at 1, work your way up to 45. 30 seconds. Let's see how far you can get. Off you go. $20 seconds gone. 5 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Stop there. Okay. So that's the sort side of things. So you're basically decluttering. You're getting rid of all the excess. The next S is set. So this is where you start to organise things and you start to put things in a logical sequence. So on this screen, same activity again, 1 through to 45. But on this screen, I'm going to split the screen up into 4 quadrants. I'm going to have numbers 1 to 11 in one quadrant, 12 through to 22 in another quadrant, 23 through to 33, I think it is, in another quadrant, and then round to 45 in the final quadrant. So I've started to group the numbers together into quadrants on the screen. So this is the first S. It's starting to give things a logical home. So this time around, you've got 15 seconds. Okay? So when the screen comes up, I'll start the timer. Start off at 1, work your way up to 45. Let's see how high you can get in 15 seconds. Go. Eight seconds gone. 2 seconds left. Stop there. Okay. So the next we're going to apply. Oh, sorry. So next, what we're going to do is I'm going to start to standardise as well. So on the screen, everything was different, slightly different numbers. So if you look on that there, everything's a slightly different font size, should I say. So everything's a slightly different font and everything's a different size. So what we're going to start to do now is I'm going to standardise. So I'm going to make everything the same size and I'm going to organise the screen in the most logical set you can imagine. So I'm going to do it sequentially, 1 through to 45. I want you to look at the screen. I want you to start off at 1. I want you to work your way around to 45. This time, I want you to try and identify what the missing number is and also get up to 45 in 5 seconds. All right, so as soon as I put it up on the screen, you've got 5 seconds. Let's say you go on, see if you can get up to 45 and identify the missing number. 3, 2, 1, go. 2 seconds gone. 3, 4, 5. Finish. You can see on this screen, it's logically organised. So you can see straight away where the errors are. You know, productivity-wise, it's much easier to work your way through to get to the 45. You can see where the problems are. You can see where the errors are as well. So the idea being is that by organising things in a logical way, you know, this could be the way you organise your packing materials, the way you organise your labels, where you organise your bed numbers. So if you've got identification in glass houses or row numbers on fields, you know, the more you can make it as standard as possible, and the numbering as large as possible, and a logical flow to it and a logical sequence to it, the easier it is for people to find things. If you look on this slide, 37's missing on that slide as well. It's been missing all the way through it, but you've got absolutely no chance when it's chaotic like that. If it's disorganised, it's very, very difficult to spot where the errors are and spot when something's starting to go wrong. So by organising it this way, it's much easier to pick up, not only productivity-wise, but it's much easier to pick up where the errors are starting to occur within the operation. So this is the 5 S's. This is what it stands and boils down to. So your first S is this idea, concept of sort. So getting rid of the clutter. The set is getting a place for everything and everything in its place. So making sure that there's a logical storage for the tool and the equipment, packaging materials, whatever you use within the process itself, so people can find it quickly and easily. The shine is the idea of making sure at the end of each day, we often talk about a 5-minute shine at the end of each day. So it's this idea of 5 minutes at the end of each day or end of each shift where people spend time getting rid of any waste, getting rid of any excess packaging materials, making sure that any tooling used is put back up onto the shadow boards, making sure that the area is swept down and is clean and tidy. So the process is at its optimum conditions, ready for the start of the next shift or start of the next day. And also as part of that 5-minute shine, you're checking things. You're checking that the tooling's not damaged, that you have got the equipment that you need for the next day, that you've got enough packing materials, that you've got enough labels. So it's just a way at the end of each day of making sure everybody's involved in doing this 5-minute shine, that everything's set up and checked to make sure it's ready for the start of the next shift. The Standardise is making sure that it's documented, the way you're going to carry out these activities, so it's written down and captured, so like step-by-step guides for how to carry out these activities, so everyone clearly understands what their role is as part of the 5-minute shine and as part of the 5S, what their individual role is and what they've got to do. And by involving more people in doing these activities and making sure everyone's trained up in it, hopefully you get this the fifth element of the 5S, is it becomes sustainable. So the idea being is that by training everybody, by involving people, by linking it through to improvements, the 5S principles stay in place and the organisation of the area stays in place as well. So it doesn't start to deteriorate over a period of time and you end up having to repeat the activity again in the future. So, and again, talking, but same as plan, do, check, act, the idea being that there should be a continuous improvement cycle. So it's not something you just do once, it should be something you can repeat on a regular basis. So we used to do 5S audits, and I'll talk you through what a 5S audit looks like, and indeed I'll get you to try and do one on your own individual business. We used to do a 5S audit every month, with the idea being that we were constantly going back and looking at what we could do to improve the workplace organisation and make sure that it was kept as clean and tidy as it possibly could be, in order to make people's lives easier and also to improve the productivity of the operation. And then what you've got in the middle is the Japanese translation. So that's where the 5S's come from originally. So that's the Japanese translation on the middle of the circles. And there you go. That's the 5S's, the English and the Japanese translations. And I mentioned before, the idea being is that you saw from the numbers game, hopefully what it does is it reduces down the risk of errors, because it's much easier to spot a problem within the operation. As you saw in the numbers game, it's much quicker to identify the numbers, therefore it should hopefully impact on the safety of the operation, on the productivity of the operation. And hopefully by having a place for everything in its place and no clutter within the operation, a reduced clutter within the operation, it improves the safety of the areas as well. So there's less chance of people falling over things, especially imagine around like packing machines or the potting machine example that we looked at, or transplanting machines or things like that. If you've got lots of clutter and you've got lots of people that are walking around that equipment and that machinery, the more clutter you've got, the more chance there is that somebody's going to have an accident. So, by hopefully decluttering the areas and reducing down the amount of clutter, hopefully improves the amount of safety within the area as well. And this is just illustrating this, so the safety element of it, the efficiency element of it, and also the control elements. So, by being able to spot any deviations from the norm. So if you start to get large build-ups of work in progress, if you start to get lots of packaging materials that are scattered around the floor, or equipment's not being put back where it should be put back, the shadow boards are starting to look a little bit diminished, that gives you some indication that things aren't quite working the way they should be working. So it makes it much easier as a manager to be able to spot when the process is starting to go wrong and then to do something about it. So we used to use the 5 S's as a way of making it easier to spot when the process was going out of control, and therefore be able to do things and work on things before it became a major problem and became a major breakdown. So quite often we use it as a way of controlling the process. So just how you go about doing it. Normally what we used to do is we used to apply 5S. If we were introducing 5S to a business from scratch, they'd never done any work on 5S before, normally what we'd do is we'd pick an area of the business, just pick one small area. So it might be one packing line, it might be one glass house, it might be the maintenance shed. So just pick one area of the business and then apply these principles to this one area, and you get this one. You focus all your efforts on getting one area looking good, and then once you've got that area working the way you wanted it to work, and the 5S principles applied, you then go and concentrate on another part of the business. And normally, what you find is if you do one area and you get it working the way you want it to work and looking the way you want it to look, it tends to spread through the business because other people look at it, they see what benefits it's delivered and how much easier it's making people's lives, and they naturally start to copy some of the principles and some of the things that you're doing. But if you're going in there from scratch, nothing's ever been done. So first of all, you pick the area. I always used to just do a quick risk assessment, especially if you're going to get people in there moving things and getting rid of clutter. So it might be that there's chemicals, unused chemicals that have been left in the area. So you just need to just go in there and just to check, first of all, that there's no risk to the people that are going to be involved in doing the 5S activity. So you might need to buy some PPE equipment for those individuals. Then you need to pick your team. I used to pick a team. I used to try and involve everybody that worked within that area. So if everybody's involved and everybody's understands the reason why you're doing it, and they feel like they've been involved in making the area look the way it should look, you've got a greater chance of sustaining the improvements as well. So that was one of the main reasons, really, was for getting everybody involved, and then making sure that people have got the things that they need to actually to do the job. So it might be that you're going to clean the area down. I used to paint the floor. So if it was in a pack house or something, or some of the manufacturing sites that I've worked in, I used to paint the floor. So I used to clean the area. I used to paint the floor. I used to label up the racks. I used to make up shadow boards. So you might need some boards, some white boards that you can actually use to make shadow boards for the tooling and the equipment that's used. Used to do shadow boards for cleaning equipment, so for brooms and the like. So basically anything that was needed within the area, I'd just make sure that we had all that equipment beforehand in order to make sure that when we did the 5S activity, it went as smoothly as possible. First thing we used to do is we used to carry out a 5S audit, and I'll send you a blank 5S audit. And essentially what it is just a set of questions. So for each of the 5 categories, so you've got sort, which is all about clutter, if there is any clutter in the area. The set is all about making sure that things are stored correctly. So minimum stock levels of any labels or any packaging, things like that. Have you got shadow boards in place? The shine is all about those checklists, for example. So have you got checklists for what people need to do at the end of each day? Is it documented? What needs to be done? Have you got the necessary equipment you need to do your 5-minute shine at the end of each day? So are things being swept and kept clean at the end of each shift or end of each operation? So that's what the shine set of shine questions are. The standardise is all about, have you documented the way you go about carrying out 5S? And then the sustain is really all about, are you doing this regularly? Are you doing these 5S audits on a regular basis? Are you recording down any improvement actions that come out of the 5S audit? And all you do is, for each of the questions, you just score yourself 0 to 4. So 0 being no compliance. So in this instance, question 1, there's lots of unnecessary tools scattered around the area. You'd basically put in a 0, or if there was none whatsoever, the opposite end of the scale, you put in a 4. And you do that for each of the questions. You total up your score at the end, and then by doing this on a monthly basis, you can start to see whether the 5S within each of the areas is improving or is it getting worse. So it's just a way of putting that, plan, do, check, act. It's a way of putting a metric behind 5S so you can actually measure how things are improving. And for each of the questions, you've got the ability to record down an improvement action. So what is the action that you need to do in order to move the score and shift it higher so you can get a better score on your next audit? And who is it that's going to carry out that action, and when are they going to do it by? So it's a way of not only auditing the area and getting yourself a 5S score, but what you can then start to do is then use it as a way of generating improvements as well. And as you can see on the bottom, as you repeat this, hopefully what you start to see is that the scores start to increase. And then I'll show you on another slide in a minute. We used to plot this out onto a radar chart so you could see which parts of the 5S activity you need to actually work upon and improve upon. Good. Like I said, I'll send you this blank template through. It'd be great for you to try it in your own individual areas. If you need to change any of these questions to make them relevant, these are just example ones that I've put in. But if you need to change them to make them more relevant to your own place, to your own operation, then I'd encourage you to do so. It might well be that you've got particular peculiarities with your process that you want to include into the 5S audit. So by all means, include that in. So the example I gave from a tomato grower where they were having lots of breakages on the trolleys that they used for doing the picking, and the steps were on a trolley for accessing the taller vines. And what they were finding is the plant debris was wrapping itself around the wheels and was causing the wheels to snap off. So that was one of their questions that they had on their 5S audit, because that was a big issue to their particular business. And it might well be that you want to change these questions as you find problems within your operation. You might want to change the questions in order to keep checking that process and make sure that it doesn't go out of control. Okay, so please shout out if you have any questions on anything we've covered so far. But moving into sort of like some of the detail behind each of the 5 S's. So the first step, or first S, is sort. So this is the idea of getting rid of the clutter within the area itself. And normally the way we go about doing it is we go into the area, we literally challenge everything that's within that area and question, should it be there? So if it's used all the time, then obviously you don't have to worry about that. But if it's something that's not used that often, it's just questioning and challenging whether it should actually be stored within the area itself. And normally what we do is we use something called a red tag attack. And all we do is we have these red tags that we tie to pieces of capital equipment if we're uncertain, or stock or tooling. If we're not certain why it's in the area itself, we'll put a red tag on it. We'll record it down what we call a red tag log, and then we'll normally email that around the business. and just get people to either claim those items or justify why it needs to be kept in the area. If we can't find a justification for it, then what we'll do is we'll actually remove it from the area itself. So basically, if it's used all the time, you don't have to tag it. If it's not used that often, or it's damaged, or you don't know what it is, then it goes on the red tag log, and then it gets a week or 2 weeks, it gets reviewed, and then basically those items get disposed of or removed from the area itself. And in that way, especially, I used to use this quite often if we had any areas within the business that were space constrained, so we didn't have a great deal of space within that area itself. So your classic could be your label stores or your pack houses or things like that. This is a really good way of just sort of like trying to free up a little bit of space within the area itself. So this is just some examples from over the years. So this is a picture of one area that I went into. This was all the clutter that we removed from the area itself. This was all the stuff that basically we couldn't justify why it was being kept within the area. And this is the stuff that went back onto the actual workbenches. So you can see that there was a difference between the two pictures. There's quite a lot of items that were being kept just in case. Particularly if you've got an engineering stores or maintenance stores where you do repair work on capital equipment, tractors, or moving equipment around the horticultural sites themselves. You know, quite often you can find that people are keeping things just in case, but when you actually challenge it, there isn't really a just in case for it. So then you've just got to question whether you keep it, and then that way you can free up more space within those areas and get the area looking the way you want it to look. It might be you use something, we use part of the set, we use things like string diagrams. So what this is we draw layouts of the operation, as you can see on this one as well, and we'll use that to identify where there's lots of walking backwards and forwards around the operation. It might be that from your waste walks, you've identified there's a lot of distance travel or a lot of movement as part of your waste walk, your process mapping activity. So you can then use that then to indicate where you possibly need to relay out the operation itself or move the equipment that's going to be used in order to reduce down the amount of distance that's being travelled. So, and again, it links back into this plan, do, check out. So it might well be that you come up with a new way of laying out the area itself. What you do is you then implement that, and then you check to make sure it's had an impact on productivity and making the job easier. And if it hasn't had the impact that you thought it would have, you go back around that loop again until you get it working the way you want it to work. So you use it as part of your improvement activities, but you're essentially using this to find out where's the best place for keeping the tooling, the equipment, the materials that you use for the process itself, so you can maximise the productivity within this particular area. And we used to talk about runners, repeaters and strangers. So you imagine it might be packing materials is a good example on this. So we used to analyse the materials that we were storing within the area. Runners are packing materials that are used all the time. So it could be your high volume products, or it could be for high volume labels that are used. The strangers would be the unusual things, so the things that are not used that often, possibly the special jobs that you work on. And then the repeaters are something that fits in between the runner frequencies and the stranger frequencies. So basically, the runners are the high frequency jobs, the strangers are the low frequency jobs. Or it could be the runners are the items that you're using all the time, the strangers are the items that you don't use that often within the area. And the idea being that once you've identified what are the things that you use all the time, what are the things you don't use that often, the things you use the most frequently need to be stored as close as possible to the operation. The items that aren't used that frequently need to be stored on the edges of the operation. And if you don't use them at all, they need to be kept in a red tag area. So they need to be put into the red tag area itself. So it's just a way of organising yourselves around the frequency that those items are used and how close they're actually kept to the operation itself. The shine is this idea of end of each day, making sure that the area is looking the way it should look. So it's breaking down the tasks down. So what are the tasks that need to be done? Who is it that needs to do it? When do we need to do it by? So it's just literally just breaking down all the tasks of how you're going to keep this area looking the way it should look, especially during busy peak seasons, because normally this is where 5S starts to drop off, is during the really busy peak seasons. So by having these task lists of what everybody needs to do at the end of each day or the end of each week is a really good way of making sure that you're keeping the area looking the way it should look and keeping it at its optimum from an efficiency point of view. So that's what we talk about with shine. I mentioned about 5 minute shine. Normally what that means is that the 5 minute shine is the tasks that are done at the end of each day. But it might well be that you've got a different set of task lists for what you need to carry out on a weekly basis. So that might be some form of maintenance on the equipment that you're using, some topping up of water levels or checking oil levels, making sure that items are lubricated correctly if it's on machinery. So it's just simple maintenance tasks that are possibly done on a weekly basis. So they go on a separate weekly checklist. And then again, part of the shine, it might well be making sure it is nice and clean and there's no debris. As I mentioned earlier, quite often when I was doing this as a major activity, we were going into an area that had never been done before. These principles never been applied to. We'd paint the floor. We'd put floor markings down, so to indicate drop zones or where any fruit, for example, that's coming in, or any materials that are coming in to be packed, where they need to be dropped. If there was any reject materials or anything that needed rework or any waste, we'd have separate areas marked out for those particular areas. So it was very easy to identify by locations on the floor, and using colour as well. It was really easy to identify where you needed to store things within the operation. And the advantage we found from that as well, when it came to bringing new people into the business, it was much easier to train people up so that people could find the things that they needed to find, and they had a basic understanding of how the process and how the operation worked. So it starts to feed in and link into how to actually make it easier to train people that are joining the business as well. So that's the third stage of your 5S's. You basically do those first 3 stages. So you do your sort, your set, and your shine. Quite often, what companies will do is just keep repeating those first 3 stages, and that's what they do. They basically just keep repeating the first 3 S's over and over again to get the business and get the operation looking the way it wants to look and where they want it to look. And that's a really good way of making sure that it's sustained. The way I used to do it, I used to do audits. So I'd audit the before, and then what we'd do then is we'd go back and we re-audit again to make sure that the scores were increasing on the 5S audits itself. So this is what I want you guys to do. I'm going to give you one of these 5S sheets. It'd be great if you guys could actually use this within your own businesses as a way of actually carrying out or identifying some improvements from a 5S perspective within your own operations. The Standardise. So this is the most difficult bit of 5S are the last 2 S's, which is keeping it going. So this is all about the Standardise, making sure it's documented. So documenting down what you're going to do as part of your 5S activities. So that might be a checklist. Quite often, I'd take photographs of the area. So I'd photograph the area. I'd show it and looking at its best. And then what I'd do then is I'd actually use that then way of setting a visual standard of what the area needs to look like at the end of each day or the end of each shift. So using photographs is a really good way of making sure people are working to these principles. So for example, if you had a store cupboard where you stored lots of pieces of equipment or tooling, I used to take a photograph of the tooling cupboard looking the way it should do, and then I used to stick that photograph on the front of the tooling cabinet itself, so that anyone going in there knew what it should look like when they left that equipment at the end of each day. Part of it could be making sure everyone's trained up on these procedures. So as part of your inductions, making sure people fully understand what the 5S principles are and what they mean to your business and the reason for it, so that way they can carry on these disciplines. Because the last thing you want is one or two people working this way, and not everybody working this way within the operation, because very quickly it can start to unravel itself if not everybody's working this way within the operation itself. And then linking it back, keep linking it back to your improvement cycles. So doing an audit, coming up with an improvement plan, implementing that improvement plan, checking by doing another audit in the future to make sure that it's actually improving things. If it is, updating your standardisation document and your checklists. If it's not, going back and revising your plan and repeating the cycle again. So this is just a way of standardising the approach within the operation. And this is just a very, very simple work instruction that somebody's done. So basically what they've done is they've got a visual picture, and then step by step what activities need to be done at the end of each day, who it is that's going to do it. They've got the days of the week, so you can tick it off and you can check to make sure that people are working this way and that they're sustaining the improvements within the operation itself. So a very, very simple work instruction for making sure the area's working and functioning the way it should be from a 5S perspective. And how this fits in. You remember I used the term Kaizen as concept. Kaizen just means change for the good or change for the better, or any form of improvement. It's the Japanese translation for continuous improvement. Standardization is making sure that the process, you sustain the improvements. And the risk is, if all you do is improvements and you don't do any standardization, the risk is that you do an improvement activity, and then over a period of time, people slip back to the old ways of doing things, and then you do another improvement activity, and then it slips back to the old ways of doing things, and you never actually get any sustained improvements. All you end up doing is just keep reinventing the wheel over and over again, basically. So it's really important that you build in these standardization activities where you document the improvement itself and you document the new way of working. And what that does then is it gives you an improvement, and then it gives you a bit of a platform to build on again the next improvement that you do. So the idea of standardization, the idea of documenting the 5S principles and the 5S way of working, it just gives you that platform on which to build again the next level of improvements and stop the risk of just keep repeating these improvement cycles over and over again. So that's what we talk about with the reason why standardization is so important. It's a bit of a boring topic, documenting things and making sure it's captured, but unless you do it, there is that risk that you never really get any sustained improvements in the operation itself. Has anyone found that in their own businesses where you just end up doing repeating improvements and keep repeating things over and over again, and you never really get any major sustained improvements? It's one of the difficult jobs of being a manager. It's trying to motivate people to keep the improvements going. And these 5S principles is a really good way of doing this. It's just a very visual way of doing it. So effectively, what your 5S is this standardization element. This is why I think 5S is a really good way of sustaining improvements, because what it gives you is this standardization element of capturing the improvements and making sure that it's documented and making sure that it's visual so that you can see that people carry on working this way. The sustain side of things, part of this is making sure everyone's trained up. Part of it is carrying out repeat audits around the operation. The management by walking about is what I mentioned just a minute ago, whereby you walk around, you look to check to make sure these audits are being carried out. You look to check that the scores are improving. And what we used to do is we used to display the 5S audits in each area. So we used to split the operation up into lots of smaller units, and we used to have a 5S audit for each of the operations, or each of the glass houses, or each of the packing lines. and each line used to have their own 5S score. And as a manager, by walking around the different lines and looking at the 5S audits and making sure that the scores are improving and making sure that the actions are being completed, it's a really good way of sustaining the improvements and making sure that the operation all improves at the same time, rather than just one area that you're focusing on in the business improving at the detriment of other areas within the business itself. So hopefully it will make it easier for you to make sure that any improvements that you've done are sustained, whilst you then go and put your focus on another part of the business and carry out another improvement activity on another part of the business. And this is what we mean by sustaining the improvements. And it's the key thing, one of the key things within Lean is that whatever improvements you do, they don't drop back off again. You keep those improvements going. You know, if you don't keep it going, you'll never get continuous improvement within the operation. All you'll get is the repeat same improvement over and over again. And this is where we're just using these radar charts, so that the scores from your 5S audits you plot on a radar chart. The idea being is that as you repeat the 5S audits, the radar chart should grow. So you should start to see the radar chart expanding and the scores getting better on the operation itself. So that's what you're aiming to do. You're aiming to grow the size of the radar chart and improve the 5S audit scores over a period of time. And what this radar chart is really good for you to do is to spot where the weaknesses are. So you can see on this one, they've scored particularly low on the sort. So that's where you need to focus your attention in order to improve your score on your 5S audits. Just some ways of keeping it going. So we've talked about the audits themselves. As I mentioned, I used to put them on a visual management board, on a whiteboard. So I used to display those in the actual area. So on each of the lines, each of the glass houses, in each of the independent parts of the business. So like the maintenance sheds, for example, or the dispatch area. I used to display these 5S audits. So that way you could see what the last audit score was, what improvement actions they had identified, and whether they were actually completing them. It might well be you use colours as a way of identifying different parts of the operation. So yellow is normally gangways. Red is normally the fact that you've got some defects or some rework area. Yellow and black is normally hazard. So it might well be that you've got forklift operations or doors opening, and using yellow and black tape. It's a good way of identifying where you never want to leave any materials or any product because people need constant access to those particular doors. So it's just a way of making it much simpler and easier for people to identify where various parts of the process need to go. As I mentioned earlier, in particular, if you're bringing new people into the business and you're training new people up, it's a really good way of making that easier. Shadow boards. So on this one, you can see they've actually got a shadow painting on the back of the board, which is where the name comes from. And that way, if somebody's using this particular equipment and this tooling, you can see the shadows exposed, and that way you know that the tooling's being used or is not put back. And then that way you can take action accordingly. And this picture down here is just another form of checklist. So you've got all the individuals that work within the operation, and then what you've got are all the different tasks across the top. And it's just a neat way of allocating individuals to carry out the certain tasks at the end of each day. Okay, just some hints and tips. Always score yourself low. So if in doubt, give yourself a really low score, because that way, you know, you've always got room for improvement. Then I've seen people when they've gone round and they've scored themselves 4s on every question, and then you've got nowhere else to go then. So, always mark yourself down, and that way then there's always things that you can do to actually improve things. And by, having a low score to start off with, and those scores getting gradually better, it encourages the team. It starts to build confidence in the team and gives them some feeling that they can make some improvements. And the good thing about 5S, it's quite visual, so people will start to see the improvements as well. So that will hopefully start to build this culture of continuous improvement, getting everybody involved and thinking about what they can do to improve the way the area functions. I always brief people on what 5S is before we go into the area and do a 5S. What you don't want is people thinking it's just all about cleaning up and tidying things up. It's much more important than that. It's much more about, we talked about the safety element of it, we talked about the efficiency element, and we talked about the control elements of 5S. It's not just about getting the area looking neat and tidy. It's much more linked into improving productivity as well and efficiency of the operation. So briefing people up front and explaining to people why you're doing it and why it's so important is crucial, which is links into this. Making sure that people don't think it's just a tidy up, but linking it back to this concept of continuous improvements and getting people involved in doing continuous improvement activity. We always used to make it fun. We used to do things whereby we used to have an award each month for the area that was looking the best. So we'd have a spot prize, which might be chocolates or biscuits for the area, for the people within that area. So we'd have a little spot prize that we'd have like a little bit of a mini award ceremony for people who carried out the best 5S activities over a period of a month. So we'd always try and make it as much fun for people as possible and not make it a bit of a painful exercise. Because if people don't enjoy it, they won't want to do it again. But if it's linked into some element of fun, then people will want to do it over and over again. Use it as a way for identifying improvements. We've talked about. Keep the 5S audit focused on one area. The risk is that you try to 5S audit the whole, or apply 5S to the whole of the business in one go. You're better off is doing one area at a time and getting each of those areas looking the way you want it to look before you move on to the next area. Because the risk is if you do spread the size of the area that you're looking at, you'll dilute your resources down and you'll not make any significant improvements. So by picking one focused area, focusing your efforts on that, you've got a greater chance of sustaining the improvements and making it look really visual. Do the 5S audits in pairs. I used to get somebody from a different area to audit my area and just be critical and challenge me. The risk is if you're 5S auditing your own area and you're doing it over and over again, there is a risk that you'll get a little bit complacent. So by inviting other people into your area and carrying out the 5S audits, hopefully that way it will challenge you and get you to identify some other things that you've not thought about how to actually improve that area. And the thing always to do, and I always make the mistake of not taking enough photographs. So it's quite nice if you take photographs right at the start and then you carry on taking photographs over a period of time. It's really interesting to see how the area actually improves. And quite often you'll forget what the area used to look like before you started doing the improvements. So by having this sort of like these series of photographs that show the improvements, it's quite nice just to have a look back and just remind yourself about how much improvement you have actually made in those areas. And again, linking that back into morale, that's a really good way of boosting the team's morale if they can actually visually see through a series of photographs how much they've moved the area on and how much they've been responsible for doing that. It'll just give them the confidence. It'll just be a real good boost in the morale, which will hopefully start to translate itself into productivity improvements. So that's a bit of summary slide on what we've covered. So we've covered the 5 S's, so the sort, the set, the shine, the standardise, the sustain. So sort being get rid of the clutter, set being a place for everything in its place. The shine is making sure that at the end of each day, the operation's looking the way it should be for the start of the next day. Standardise is all about documenting it, and then the sustain is all about planning to do audits and keep repeating these audits and making sure that you maintain the improvements that you've already achieved before you go on to doing further improvements within the operation. Okay, so what I want you to have a look at doing is just pick an area within your business, and like I always say, is even if you don't think this applies to your business, just give it a try. Just try doing a 5S audit. Just see. It's amazing. Sometimes you see different things by doing that you're applying these tools and techniques. So it might be worthwhile just picking one area, doing a 5S audit, and involving a few people, and just seeing how people react to it. You will find there's certain individuals in certain businesses who really pick up on the 5S side of things and really want to own it and want to drive it forward. And it's great if you can find those individuals. It's another great way of involving people and getting more people involved in doing improvement actions. You know, and linking it back to the overall lean objectives. What we talk about with continuous improvement is where you've got everybody in the business that's focused on doing improvements, and you will have certain individuals that will naturally gravitate to 5S and workplace organisation. So it's a really good way of getting those individuals involved and making them feel like they can actually improve the operation itself. So have a bash, take the 5S audit that we send out, have a bash at using it, and then next time when we get together, we'll have a review of how you've gone on with that, and we'll talk through any problems that you've had or any other ideas that you've got about how they can be used within your operation.